Welcome to Casual Friday. So I really have two things this week. I have a spinning update because I'm taking a new spinning class, and I have a knitting update. So if you want to skip the spinning, I have links down in the description to each section of the podcast. So Saturday was a really big day for me, both good and bad. I started my new spinning class. It's a Beyond Basics spinning class at the Textile Center through the Weavers Guild. Now, when I took my beginning spinning class last month, there were 9 students in the class. So the teacher had an assistant. I remember as a knitting teacher at my local yarn shop when I was teaching beginning knitting students, it always took a lot of mental energy for both the teacher and the student to get through that first session because they're learning so much, they're working so hard to learn, and as a teacher, you have so much one-on-one. It's a very different environment. This class has 3 students, so it was really interesting. I wasn't really completely sure what this class was going to be. So I brought sort of a list of things that my goals that I have, things I want to work on to remember to ask about. So one of the things is just learning better control, like being able to spin the yarn that I want. Like say I want a yarn that it has these qualities and being able to control that. Because I am more intentional in my desires. I want to knit with the yarn that I spin, and I want to spin the yarn that I want to knit with and not be left with yarn that I don't know what to do with. Because as I've mentioned many times, I'm terrible at stashing. I don't like to stash. I don't like to try to figure out what should I do with this yarn. One of the things that has really surprised me about spinning, because I knew so little about it when I went into it, was the huge spectrum of results that you can get. I had made this decision to spin after not being able to find yarns from different yarn breeds. And then I thought, oh, but I can get fleece. So it makes sense then to learn to spin. And I thought that was all, oh, well then I'll learn how to spin and then I can try each of these yarns. I'll understand their qualities. Not knowing that there were so many different ways to prepare the fleece, carding, combing, and whether it was commercial top versus hand combed top, roving versus bats, all of that. I had no idea that there were all these different ways to prepare the fleece. And then I didn't know that there were so many different ways to spin it. So that's been one of the fascinating things for me is and I don't think this is something I could have learned by buying commercially spun yarns from different fleeces, because there's a more limited range of preparations that commercially spun yarn is going to go through. They're all going to be scoured in the same way pretty much. They're going to be prepared in one of a couple of different ways, and then they're going to be spun based on how their machines can handle it. It's going to limit the staple length of the fibers. So there are more limits on commercially prepared yarn, and in some ways they aren't going to be as different as you might expect. And also, one breed could be very different depending on how you prepared it and how you processed it. So that was a big revelation to me. And so that's really of interest to me to sort of sample a lot of different wools and try different wools using the same preparation and drafting method, and then use one specific wool and then prepare it and draft it and spin it and ply it in multiple ways to kind of see how things work out that way. So our teacher wanted to know, well, that was like one of the first things she asked us, how long have you been spinning? What are your goals? And then we all want better control over our spinning. Like we want to be able to control the thickness of our singles more reliably rather than always just spinning the same way, getting the same thickness every time. So she gave some fiber and she said, okay, just start spinning like whatever you would normally do, like your default method. So we're all spinning along and she's like, okay, so everybody's spinning pretty fine singles. So you're all pretty much in the same place. And, so we had some similar goals. And she then said, okay, well, I'm going to be teaching these things, but I'm also going to address what you want in this way and that way and the other way. So that was the first thing that I was really excited about. The big eureka moment that I had in that class came from doing something that I had learned about before I sat down at my wheel for the first time ever. I had watched a Craftsy class, and Craftsy is now called Blueprint. I don't know if you guys know that. I found that out when I went on a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, what's going on? What is Blueprint? Is that something different? I don't understand. So they're called Blueprint now. So before I took my first spinning class, I watched Amy King's class up to a certain point, up to the point where she was like troubleshooting mistakes in spinning, because I hadn't done any spinning yet. It didn't make any sense to do that. But one of the very first things that she tells in that video is to do these wheel games and like practicing treadling, so that you're going clockwise and you're going counterclockwise, so that you can just easily do that. Then going faster or going slower. And then she has you adjust your drive band so that you're using each of the different ratios in a very systematic way, and then adjusting the brake every time in a very systematic way to see what happens. And I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. So after my first class, and I brought my rental wheel home, I remember going through those games, and I did it, but I didn't really get anything out of it. I didn't really understand what I was supposed to get from it. So I tried it again a few weeks later, and what I noticed was that, okay, well, in order to get the thickness of single that I want, I have to either draft faster or treadle slower or faster, and I thought it's not comfortable for me to go faster, for example. So I kind of settled into my 8-to-1 ratio, which is sort of the middle. It's the middle ratio, middle pulley distance. I settled into that. It's the most comfortable for me. I treadle a certain way. Every time I put my right foot down on my treadle, I draft out. So I had this rhythm, and I could make pretty reliably the same, thickness of single. And I knew that if I took more fiber from my fiber source, I pinched out more of it, I could get it to be thicker. And I knew that if I took less, it could be thinner, but then, it would break, or, different things would happen. So I kept going back to my sort of middle ground, fine single. And that was that. The other thing that I had understood is that when I'm doing a single and there are thin spots and there are thick spots, the twist always goes to the thinnest spot, and you get less twist in the thicker spot. So I understood that. So there are all these little separate things that I understood. They were sort of like these puzzle pieces where I could clearly see what was on the puzzle piece, but I hadn't put it all together. So in this class, she was saying, okay, I want you to go on your biggest whirl, the biggest pulley. So it would be the slowest, speed. And she was explaining to us how we could get thicker yarn by grasping more of the yarn, and thicker yarn needs less twist. And then, in the middle one, you have a little bit more twist. And then when you go finer, you need a lot more twist. And I finally heard that and understood that, oh, I'm not supposed to be changing my treadle. What I was always doing is changing my treadling and my drafting speed, and I was always getting the same single. And the point was to try to get something different. So you treadle and you draft at the same speed, but you're using more yarn on the big ratio, so that you can get the thicker yarn because it doesn't need as much twist. And then if you want to do a finer one, you go down to the smaller one, and then because you're using less fiber, it will have more twist in it and it will stay together. It all came together. I'm like, oh, I finally get it. And I'm kind of used to this now. After having gone through the Master Hand Knitting program and doing a lot of genealogical research, I understand the need to kind of circle back periodically through what you've looked through before. Like with a genealogy, with a document, you might have ordered a death certificate because you want to know what, great grandma's maiden name was, or you want to know what her parents' name. You have some specific piece of information you want to get. You get this death certificate, it's got tons of information on it. You kind of see it, but it's not what you're looking for. And sometimes you don't have enough other information to make sense of that one piece of information. So later on, like a year later, when you find out something that you didn't realize, like grandma had a fifth daughter that you never heard of, and you go back and you look at great grandma's death certificate and you realize the informant on the death certificate was that fifth daughter that you never knew about. So it's like you always need to circle back and then pick up on things that you were kind of aware of but you don't understand the meaning of. And that's what I'm seeing with learning spinning, is that and I had deliberately gone out at the beginning of learning to spin reading as much as I could early on, knowing that it wouldn't really make a lot of sense, but just making myself aware of things, because now I go, okay, I know I saw something about this. I'm going to go look at that particular source because then I know it's there and I know where to look and what to look for. So that was really exciting. And then another thing that we are learning, which I didn't know we were going to learn, is she wanted to teach us the difference between washing raw fleece and scouring raw fleece. And just when she said that, I was like, what? Like, I knew that they were scouring wool and washing wool. I thought they were done at different stages of the process, that you scoured raw wool, and then when you were done spinning, then you washed that. And then after it's been knitted, really you're using something very mild and you're not using a lot of like strong detergents. You don't need to. You're just washing to, freshen up and reblock things. So in that way, I was just thinking, oh, at each stage of the process, you're using a weaker and weaker detergent solution because you don't need to get all the lanolin out, for example, or you don't need to get all the poop out. But she was saying no, that there's two ways of preparing raw fleece. So both of them involve soap. I had seen like preparations for scouring fleece where people just soaked it in cold water overnight before then they scoured it. But no, this was lukewarm water with some detergent in it, same amount of detergent that she would do in the scouring, and you just let it sit. So after like 20 minutes, you kind of loosen up the tips a little bit to get the dirt out and to open up the fiber so that the soap can get in. And you let it soak for a couple hours or overnight or whatever. And then you rinse it. Might need to rinse it a couple times and then let it dry. And the lanolin won't come out because the water's not hot enough. So that's going to allow us to do what's called spinning in the grease. And again, that was a revelation to me. I, for some reason, thought spinning in the grease meant you hadn't washed it at all. And I just thought, why would you do that? I did not get it. So scouring then is much higher temperature so that the lanolin will melt out. And then when it gets just, cool enough so that you can actually get your hands in there, then you move it from there into rinse water that's the same temperature as this wash water was, and rinse it out. You might need to rinse it a couple times. And then I think we put it in cold water. Did we do that or no? No, I think then we put it, no, we didn't put it in cold water. That's like after you finish plying, you do that. So I did that, and we had merino wool, which is very fine and felts very easily. Then we have baby doll South Down, which is almost like steel wool in a way. It's a really weird texture. It's not like coarse like that. It's just spongy like that. And then we had Jacob, which is a long wool. It's like pretty long fibers. So we had 3 different fibers. So we're supposed to divide our little stash into halves and wash 1/2 and scour 1/2. And I actually really liked the results of washing. The scouring, I don't know if I maybe went up, it was too high in temperature or maybe too much. So I don't know. I'm not sure that the merino is still okay. Maybe have felt it. I'll find out tomorrow. But it was a very interesting process. I'm really happy to learn this because at some point soon in the next month or two, I want to buy a raw fleece and process it and then spin it and then knit from it. So I really did want to learn this process. So that I was really happy about. Then the last thing that we did that I was so excited about was we learned what's called the long draw draft. So it's the kind, it makes woolen yarn. So when you're first taught beginning spinning, they usually teach you a method of drafting that's called worsted. And it creates, a very kind of firm, drapey yarn. If you have any luster in the fiber, it's really going to show. It's really nice for longer fibers, silk, things like that. So we learned that. So this is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in the in-between. But I thought that was going to be too hard. Like we weren't going to be ready to do that. And so she taught us how to do that. And she had us on her wheel, started, and then she showed each of us, like, here's how you do here. And I was like, oh, I'm doing it. I can't believe it. So then she gives us some fiber to do it on our own wheel. And I'm getting super thick, too much twist. And, I was having all kinds of problems and feeling a little frustrated and thinking, okay, this is going to be like when I first learned to spin on the spindle. I just need to practice a little bit and then wait a couple days and practice. And at some point it'll click. So she gave us a certain amount of fiber and she gave us this little sample that she had spun, a little 2-ply sample. And so our goal was to practice the long draw and then see if we could match her sample. And I looked at how much wool she gave us and I saw how fast, long draw eats it up fast, but I was really eating it up fast. And I thought, I don't know that I'm going to figure this out before I run out of wool. So I went back to a craftsy class. This one is by J.C. Boggs Faulkner, who does Ply Magazine. And she has this video that I had been watching from worsted to woolen and everything in between. And so I'd kind of gotten up to the woolen and the long draw and hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to it because I knew I wasn't ready for it yet. So before I sat down at my wheel at home to try to see if I could do this, I watched the method of drafting that comes right before the long draw, because she really has systematically, here's how you take what you learned in the previous one and then apply it to this. Here's what you take in the previous one and how you apply it to that. And so I did this, and it was one where you've pinched where the twist ends and you're pulling backwards, and then you open up your fingers and let the twist go into it, and then you pinch and pull back again, let the twist in. So you do that, and then you get to the point where you pinch, you pull back, and you release, but you don't move your hand forward. You just keep your hand, the pinching hand, where it is, and you just keep pulling back, and then you can do that. So I'm like, yay, I did it. So I came up with my samples a little longer, and if I match it up at certain places, it matches her. I was so happy that I learned to do it. So this method that I was practicing right before the long draw draft is one I really like. I just like the rhythm of it. I like that it can be used with comb top really easily. There's just something about it that I really liked, and I did some samples. We had another thing of fiber, and I thought I'm going to practice the different ratios, a thicker, medium, thinner, and using the same exact method where I'm pinching, pull back, pinching, pull back, pinching, pull back, because this is combed top. So I tried it, and I divided up what I had into thirds, and so I'd have about the same amount. So I did one that was thicker, and then I did one that was medium, and then one was thinner. The thinner one I started running into trouble I think I was messing with my brake in the wrong way, but so I'm going to have to figure that out a little more. But I wanted to see, I wanted to practice that thicker, thinner, thinner business using the same method. So I did that. I bought some fiber thinking I was going to need to practice more in the long draw. Bought some fiber, the 4 ounces of it that I'm going to spin up using this method, and then knit something with it to see how cables work with it, because I'd liked something between the worsted kits. It's too dense and too heavy, the true worsted, and the woolen isn't going to give me the kind of texture I want when I knit with texture. So, when I spun up all of that fiber using the long draw, then I knit it up, and it's a little bit lumpy, but it's very fuzzy, and it would be very warm, and it was probably, I think this is like Shetland wool. It would be really good for color work where it kind of blends together, but not for cables, which is something that I like to do. So I'm thinking that something that's kind of more in the middle might work well enough for cables and might be a little warmer and a little bit faster to spin than this short drafting for worsted. So it's an interesting experiment, and I'm really happy. All right, so my knitting update. Now, I mentioned that last Saturday was really great because my spinning class. It was also really not so great. Right in the middle of the spinning class, I got a phone call from my mother. Now, my mother and I used to call each other all the time. Like anytime one of us wanted to talk, we call each other all the time. But she has early dementia, and then she had a traumatic brain injury a couple of years ago with a brain bleed. So her short-term memory is really bad. She sometimes does try to call me. It takes her a couple of hours to figure out how to call me. So I call her every Sunday. So it was Saturday afternoon, and it was a call from her, and I thought it was probably her husband, because sometimes he'll call me to update me. And sure enough, it was Al. And he said, "Oh, I wanted to update you on some things about your mother's health. She's on the phone too." And I'm walking out of the spinning class, and I was like, "What's wrong?" Because there's no way both of them are on the phone, and they're calling me, and there's nothing wrong. So here's a kind of a dubious record that my mother has held up till now. My husband and I, between the two of us, we have 4 mothers and stepmothers. So we each have a mother and a stepmother. They're all alive, and 3 out of the 4 of them have had breast cancer and survived it. My mother was the only one who didn't. So they were calling me to tell me that my mother has breast cancer, and she's 80 years old. So she had decided, long before she, started she had her injury and all that if she were to get, cancer or something like that, that she would not do chemo and radiation, because it's a pretty miserable process to live through. And she pretty much figures that at age 80, these are her bonus years. So she is going to have a mastectomy this week. My first internal reaction to that, which I did not say out loud, was when Al said, she's going to have a mastectomy on, I think it's August 6th. My first reaction mentally was, oh, well, then I'm going to knit her some knockers. Whenever I get big news, big life news, whether it's, usually for somebody else, it could be good news or bad news. My first response is, what am I going to make? And now often that's something knitted. But it's not always. I have a very dear friend, who was widowed at age 30, and she doesn't cook. She hates to cook. And so my first response to that was, okay, I'm going to have to make her a big pot of chicken soup that she can portion it out. She can keep in the freezer, and a big pan of lasagna. It was like, that was my immediate response, because when I make things for people, then it's to show them that I love them. But what's funny is that Al said to me, well, I have a project for you. He said, after your mom's diagnosis, we were out at this, restaurant for lunch. So Al's whole career was in food service. He's 20 years in the Army as an Army cook, and then he worked in hotels and hospitals and even the state prison, and really worked with he worked with the prisoners on helping to improve their skills and also the quality of the food. So he's very, food oriented in that way. And he's a maker too. They go to a doctor for the first time, he brings a plate of cookies in for the staff. They go to a restaurant, he wants to get to know their waitresses, and they have a regular waitress and they get to know her. And if they have a special occasion, if it's an anniversary or birthday or something, they'll bring a cake with them to the restaurant. They ask for it to be served to them for their dessert, and then the rest of the cake is for the kitchen. So that's the kind of thing he does. So he was talking to their waitress, and she said, oh, because I think she had a mastectomy. She said, oh, well, there's these knitted prostheses that you can get. And so he was telling me all this, and I said, oh yeah, knitted knockers or titbits. I've made them before, and I'm planning already to make some more. And he's like, oh, you're way ahead of me. That's what my knitting project is. I made one. The original pattern was called, as far as I know, it was called Titbits, and it was in a knitting magazine years and years ago. And that was the pattern that I used. A friend of mine, her sister-in-law, had breast cancer, and I made one for her. I still had the yarn that I'd used from that, and it was some bamboo yarn. So usually they want some very soft cotton or bamboo, because those are the softest against the skin, especially if they're radiation burn scars or just it's just very tender area. And so there's an organization, there's actually a couple of organizations, and I'm not clear on what the difference is, or if there is a difference. Well, I think there's a difference, but I'm not clear what it is. One is called knittedknockers.org, and I'll put this down in the description. Knittedknockers.org. They're based out of the state of Washington. And then there's one called knittedknockersusa.org. Both of them are charitable organizations registered here in the United States, and both of them work at distributing knitted knockers to women who've had mastectomies. So clinics can request them, women can request them individually. People who want to knit for the organization can use their patterns, and they have a list of yarns that are required if you're going to knit them for the organization, because they're yarns that they know work well, that wash and then air dry without being stiff, because some cottons can get stiff, and you don't want that. So they have different patterns. You can use double pointed needles, you can use circular needles and a magic loop, you can start at the nipple and then work out and then end in the back. You end with a drawstring so that can be stuffed there, or you can start at the back and then work out toward, because if you start at the back, there's more stitches, it's a little easier to get started. So here, and they have different cup sizes, which I find that's always frustrating to me, but I can at least understand that you can get some standardized measurements that way, because a C cup isn't the same if your bra band size is different, but whatever. So here's what they look like. It's I've got it stuffed, and the idea is that you keep the drawstring area open so that the women can add weights if they want to add a little bit of weight to it. They can take out stuffing, they can add more stuffing. Some women use these as they're going through a reconstructive process, like they can't get an implant at the time of their surgery. There's maybe not enough skin yet, and so they have to gradually stretch and enlarge it, and so that they can use these, they can have more stuffing in it at the beginning, and take stuffing out, and then to fill in the spaces if women have had a lumpectomy. So there's a lot of different ways to use these. So I was looking at their list of yarns, and the ones that I have from before aren't on the list, which is fine if I'm knitting for my mom. I don't, say try this on, see how do you like it? But I wanted to get started right away. So I looked at the list of yarns, and then I ordered some online, and it just came today. But in the meantime, I knit this kind of light pale green one, and then one that's super multicolored, which I thought my mom would like. And then I just looked in the bag because I didn't remember what I'd ordered. So I ordered kind of this light pink color. I've been trying to figure out what colors to order. There were some colors that seemed really appropriate that were out of stock online, and I don't know yet who might carry this stuff locally. So I ordered some pale because I also want to knit knockers for her breast clinic wherever she's going, and knit pairs of knockers for them. So I would plan on knitting some sort of beige, some sort of tan, and some sort of brown. You know, they need, you know, just different neutral colors that would go with like a bra that you maybe wouldn't be as visible through a shirt. Colorful ones are fine if you're wearing a dark shirt or whatever. So I bought a couple of these kind of pinky colors, and I bought like 3 colors of like crazy colors, and I'm thinking, oh well, these will be great, and I can knit these also for, you know, the breast clinic. And then I'm reading, and mostly they want neutrals. They don't use the bright ones very often. But I thought, well, I'll still knit a few of those and offer them to them, and I'll find some more. This was the hard thing, was like trying to find like which these approved yarns, like what colors would be the ones that would be right for those particular yarns, that would be sort of skin tones for people who are, you know, the variety of shades. And I'm just not sure. So if any of you have made knitted knockers and know off the top of your head like which brands have good skin tones and a variety of skin tones, I'd really appreciate it. Also, like I look at this and I think this is so huge, and it's hard to imagine if this is the right size for my mom or not. So I'm gonna have to make her some when I'm out there and kind of see what size they are, what size she would kind of need. One thing I would recommend, I didn't even think about this when I was online and I was ordering yarn. I thought, oh, I'm going to order some double points because I have lots of double points. I didn't have any in a size 6. And the reason I didn't have any in a size 6 is because that's actually the size I use the most. I used to teach mitten classes, and I'd have to buy a new set of double points every time I taught that class because I could never keep track of an entire set. Because I use them for like as tools. I never use them hardly as double points. I usually use magic loop. For these, because they're kind of triangular, it's best with 3 double points, like a third of the stitches on each, because increases and decreases are done at the beginning and end of each needle, or only at the end, depending on where you are in the pattern. And I hate using markers, and I would use a marker with magic loop for these. It didn't help me. I was like, I think after 3 attempts on magic loop, I said, I got to get some double points. So I ordered them, and I ordered these Knitter's Pride Carbons needles because I'd heard really good things about them. But what I wasn't thinking about was that it's kind of a bigger size, like a size 5 or 6 needle is kind of big when you're starting with 6 stitches. They're kind of heavy, and I should have gotten double points. But so what I found was easier was to start in the center, and what they tell you is to just cast on using your regular cast on, and then later you use the yarn tail to kind of weave in around that opening to create a drawstring. What I did instead was I used this pinhole cast on method. I have a link to it at the top here, and it just creates the drawstring on its own. It's like the reverse of fastening off a hat at the top, where you run the yarn tail through all the live loops. You start with the yarn tail through live loops, and that way you don't have to try to weave it in and create a drawstring later. But I would encourage you, what they really like is, I mean, these are national organizations, but they really like it if you donate locally. They want like local knitters to knit for people in their own community. So, and then donate to places in the community, which then can send these to the clinics and the women who live in the state or a region of the state, wherever you live. So I would encourage you, if it's something you like to do, or it's a very quick project in the summertime, no heavy hot wool in your lap. They're very quick to make. It's the kind of thing where I think that this will be my go-to type of, I want something to knit this afternoon that will be done this afternoon. And it used to be for me dishcloths. I'd like once a year, I'd like spend a weekend. Oh, I don't feel like doing anything but knitting dishcloths. So from now on, I'll be knitting knockers on the weekends. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.